So what's in a name? Quite a bit, actually. See, a name, especially in geography, is an assertion of ownership, conquest. And that's true of Prince Edward Island as well. So, since we're all stuck at home here, unable to get out, I thought I would bring a bit of history to you by talking about how we got our name on Prince Edward Island. So the earliest name that we have for Prince Edward Island come from the Mi'kmaq people, the indigenous inhabitants. And they had two names for the place. Minigu, a favorite of mine, because literally it means the island. And islanders love the definite article with respect to our name. But the more common name that we use still is the word Ebiquit or Epiquit. Tourism marketers tend to translate that as cradled in the waves, which is quite a poetic line. The actual translation is closer to parallel to the land. In any case, those were the names applied to our province until the arrival of Europeans. Now, Jacques Cartier sailed along the northern coast of Prince Edward Island in 1534. And already in that era, there was St. John's Island, or in French, Ile Saint-Jean. You see the name appearing on maps from the period, sometimes in Latin, sometimes in Italian, sometimes in French. It's kind of a notional island. The grasp of the geography of the Gulf of St. Lawrence was pretty rudimentary. And so while you see the island showing up there, it's seldom a place shaped like our island or in the same place in the Gulf as our island. It's not until Samuel Champlain mapped the region that we first start seeing the name Ile Saint-Jean being applied to an island more or less the same shape and size and in the right place in the Gulf. And so to the French, we became Ile Saint-Jean. And in 1720, they established a colony here, and the name was in use until the British acquired the island in 1763 by conquest and treaty. Now, the British were a little bit lazy because they didn't give the island a new name. They simply translated the old name, St. John's Island. And so we became St. John's Island, and that caused us problems in the settlement era that followed because St. John's was such a common name around the globe, in North America, and even in the Gulf region. There was a St. John's, Newfoundland, for example, and a St. John, New Brunswick. And there was confusion if you were trying to recruit immigrants, whether or not the place you were trying to bring them sounded like Newfoundland or New Brunswick or Prince Edward Island. It also caused confusion with the mail, which often went astray. And so, in the 1780s, the colony decided it needed a new name, and it passed an act creating a new name, New Ireland, probably because our governor was Irish. And the act was sent off to Britain for the approval of the Crown, and the government in Britain didn't approve the act. They withheld their assent. Why? Well, they got their nose out of joint. They felt that islanders had been uppity because they didn't follow the proper protocol in renaming themselves. The proper sort of a procedure was to pass an act in the form of a petition that would humbly ask the authorities in Britain to grant us a new name. So the Colonial Office sniffed and said, well, New Ireland is taken. You can have New Guernsey, or you can have New Anglesey. Well, we didn't want either of those names, and so we stuck with St. John's Island, as unsatisfactory as that was, until 1798. And at that point, we discovered that Prince Edward, the Duke of Kent, a younger son of King George III, military commander in Halifax, had taken a personal interest in our colony. In fact, he recommended the fortifications here be improved. Well, In a paroxysm of loyalty and gratitude, the legislature passed an act requesting that we be renamed for the Duke of Kent. And in 1799, we officially became Prince Edward Island. A couple of footnotes to that story. First of all, Prince Edward never actually stepped foot on Prince Edward Island. And secondly, what we didn't know about the interest he expressed was that he also queried why we should be a colony in the first place and why we weren't simply annexed to Nova Scotia. If we'd known that, we might not have felt the same level of gratitude. But we didn't, and the name stuck, and that's the name that we have. Now, Prince Edward, why else should we remember him? Well, George III had a passel of sons. I like to say mostly useless sons, going from one scandal to another, womanizers, drinkers, etc. And the heir to the throne, the Prince Regent, who later became George IV, was the only one of the sons with a legitimate heir or offspring. He was married, a spectacularly unhappy marriage, and they had a daughter who was the next in line to the throne. But when she died, Parliament essentially sent out marching orders to the other sons saying, if you're not already married, get married and start to produce offspring. Well, Prince Edward had a mistress of many years, a French-Canadian woman that he had met in Quebec. They were apparently went through a marriage ceremony, but technically they could not be married because there is a law in Britain that no member of the royal family can marry a Roman Catholic. And so their marriage was illegal. So Prince Edward did his duty. He found a wife, a Protestant wife from a royal house in Europe, had a child, and promptly died. That child is Queen Victoria. So I suppose Prince Edward might be memorable for at least one other reason. But we like to think he's memorable because he gave us our name. And now you know.